Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Reproductive Sankofa, the first such conversation about the issues for women of African descent in this country. We are live streaming Caribbean, the US, and right across the world today, so please be aware of that. I want to ask Dr. Simon Chaplin, who is somebody I met last year, to welcome us to the welcome.
Thank you, Elsie. My name's Simon Chaplin. I'm the Director of Culture and Society at the Wellcome Trust and also Director of Wellcome Collection, the building we're in today. For those of you who don't know Wellcome, we're a global charitable foundation. We exist to improve health for everyone by helping great ideas to thrive. We fund a lot of scientific research, but we also fund research in humanities and social science, public engagement, education, and in Wellcome Collection, our museum and library, we try and use a combination of art, science, history, and lived experience to challenge how people think and feel about health. And for us, recognizing that health is multifaceted, is an intrinsic part of our human experience, and requires us to be attentive to all of the social and cultural influences, determinants, barriers to good health, is an important part of our mission. So I'm very pleased to welcome you today. I hope you enjoy a productive day. A few words, very brief words of housekeeping. We're not planning any fire alarm test today, so if the fire alarm does go off, please, if you could leave the building, up the stairs, out through the main entrance. If that's blocked for any reason, staff will direct you to exits at the rear of the building. And our assembly point is in the quadrangle at University College London, directly behind the Wellcome building. But staff will be on hand to guide you there. I'm hoping there'll be no such disruptions today. Other than that, I want to hope you enjoy your time here in Wellcome Collection, that you foster debate and challenge, and that you think how some of that challenge can be directed back to organisations like Wellcome, and what more we can do as an organisation to support black women's health in particular in our mission. Thank you very much indeed.
Thanks very much, Simon. So just a few thank yous, first of all to the Iolanthe Trust. And as a practicing midwife myself, it is particularly apt that the Iolanthe, who is part of the midwifery network in this country, have seen fit to lead the charge to make a difference to the lives of actually all women. The fact is that women of African descent sit at the base of many things in this country and across the world. There is a need for action on black maternal and infant mortality, and the three things that are concerning me personally are the deaths. So I've been looking at them since 2001, and I've seen them to rise. And very strikingly, in 2018, the 1st of November, when I saw that we were 5 times more likely to die than women of European descent. The other thing I found in my own work is that the voices of women are absent a lot of the time, and black women's voices are deeply hidden. Behind all of this, which we haven't really yet begun to take full account of, is the morbidity. The morbidity for mothers, the morbidity for babies, the families, and the life course that ensues from that. So we're using the precept of Sankofa today, the African concept of looking back to see how it is that we go forward. So this upcoming conference that we've agreed with the Iolanthe is that we're going to learn from international approaches, because there's very little to date that has been done in this country around these issues. Or if it has been, then it's hidden. So I'm looking at a particular person who did quite a bit of work many years ago for Pakistani women, but actually I'm sure a lot of them are still sitting on the shelves. We want to examine how midwifery practice can improve through organizations like Mimosa Midwives. And midwives, as we know, are the primary caregivers in this country of women who are pregnant, going through childbirth and the postnatal period. We want to enable the voices and the experiences of Black women service users to be heard, and particularly to begin the work of realizing and embedding the factors which will cause a step change in the maternity outcomes for Black mothers and babies in this country. I've worked a lot within the communities, and some of the questions that the communities have been asking is, how should the government respond to the UK confidential inquiry findings? Is the cumulative effect of living in racist societies a key factor in maternal mortality? Or are there genetic factors? Do we need a national strategy to develop community midwives and doulas? Do we take it seriously as knife crime, or is that a false dichotomy? So our theme today is cultural safety. We want to embed the concept of cultural safety into maternity care to improve the poor outcomes for marginalized communities. It sits at the root of decolonizing health for mothers, babies, and their families. Much of these issues are hidden within data and statistics that are not normally perused by the ordinary public. That some communities are badly impacted by the care they receive is not widely known. The need to be listened to and to be heard is not fully embedded into the medicalized model of maternity care. And when we have media presentations on the topic, they focus on when things go wrong, and much of the root causes there are then obscured. Some of the stories are deeply hidden, and some voices are never heard. So just to describe for you cultural safety, and we have to use that today as our benchmark because we're actually discussing things that are deeply painful, some of the things you will never have heard before today. And I just want to share with you the concept that our little team of midwives use. We use cultural safety because it's about an environment that is safe for people. There is no assault, no challenge, or denial of their identity, of who they are, and what they need. It's about shared respect, shared meaning, shared knowledge and experience. We learn together with dignity, and we truly listen. So unsafe cultural practice is any action that diminishes, demeans, or disempowers the cultural identity and well-being of an individual or a group. So finally then, in the words of the dearly departed Toni Morrison, when times are hard, there is no time for despair, no place for self-pity, no need for silence, and no room for fear. We speak, we write, we do language. That is how civilizations heal. So, thank you very much. Now, in African tradition, and other traditions actually, when we have serious issues to discuss, we pour libation. And just to quote from Kimani Nehusi's work, libation is found throughout the African world, on the continent as well as the Americas, the Caribbean, and other parts of the world where Africans dwell. Libation is an immensely important part of the African cultural equipment. In fact, this ritual is a marker of African identity. So we're going to have libation poured today by Sister Sandra Golding, who is our healer. What?
Good morning, everyone. We're going to pour libation. As Elsie has mentioned, it's important that we, in our traditions, we pour libation. We pour libation to call upon our ancestors, who shoulders we stand upon. We as women, we stand on the shoulders of our mothers' mothers. We stand on the shoulders of greatness. It's important that we acknowledge those women who have come before us, because we are the mothers who give birth to nations. We are Mother Earth. We should acknowledge the earth, the elements. Call upon our ancestors to visit us, to see who we have become. We pray that they will be proud of who we are and who we've become today. We pour to honor our past. We pour to honor our families. We pour to honor our elders. We pour for our future and future generations. We pour for those in the spirit world, and we pour for those in the ancestral world. What I'd like you to think about, I want you to, in our traditions, we call upon our ancestors who've passed, and we pour some water in a plant, but we haven't got a plant, so we'll just drop a little bit of water here. And I want you to call upon people who have passed onto the ancestral world. Just name them, and after we name them, we just say Ashe. So, anybody?
Dorothy Janky.
Ashe. 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 Nanny of the Maroons. Harriet Tubman. Ashe. 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 We call upon all the midwives, all those mothers, all those women who would go out into the communities and support the women who to give birth. Ashe? Ashe. Okay, thank you.
So part of the success of today is the community that has come together to support. So I want to introduce to you Sister Jendai, who is from a community. She's an activist and a very hard worker in terms of our community. So Jendai, she's going to look after us now for the rest of the day.
Greetings, greetings. What an honor and what a task to look after you for the rest of the day. Wow, wow, wow. Ask you to close your eyes, please. And just breathe in. And as we hold, we locate our moments in a moment of peace. And as we exhale, we bring our shoulders down as far as they can go. And we are releasing all the distractions, all the things you cannot change today, all the things that you worry about. We are releasing them, and we are making ourselves present in the space, in the moment today, and giving ourselves to ourselves in well-deservedness to be here. Please open your eyes. How are you doing? Okay, so I'm your chair for today. A warm welcome to everyone. Mama Elsie Gill, it's our tradition to ask the elders permission to continue.
Please.
Thank you. So, a warm welcome to our elders. professionals, clinicians, brothers and sisters from the community, family and friends, warmest welcome to the mothers in the room and those who are carrying life yet to enter into this world. I salute you. Today is a groundbreaking day. It's a day of learning, healing and inspiration. A day we address some of the critical issues experienced by Black women in the prenatal, birthing and postnatal journeys. In addressing these issues, we want to create a vibration of peace and reflection, which encourages us to all take responsibility and come forward with solutions to the increasingly concerning experiences and statistics which indicate we have a lot of work to do to eliminate the conditions that lead our Black mothers, sisters, aunts and friends into experiencing higher mortality rates in childbirth than their counterparts. So I am Sister Jendai, and I would like to thank Sister Mama Elsie Gale for inviting me to chair this critically important event today, which, as I said, intends to be a day that in part reflects our aspirations for improving the conditions experienced by our sisters and to be a harmonious, enriching, spiritual experience, as well as a place where we increase our knowledge and wisdom to effect positive change, irrespective of our role and experiences in relation to the subject today. So we are going to Sankofa. Sankofa, go back and fetch it. We are going to retrieve the past in order to look forward. So I'm all Sankofa out, earrings, necklace, okay? So it's a very important principle that we are living today. We are living reproductive Sankofa. So I want to thank Dr. Simon Chaplin for his housekeeping announcements today. We're running a little bit late, so we're going to put in a bit of catch up. He didn't mention the toilets. I don't know where they are. I'm just hoping that they're signposted as we go out. Yes, we've seen them. We've located. Some of us need to get to them very quickly. Yes. So before we proceed, I'd like to ask you to keep your phones on, but keep them on silent, please. And if you're on Twitter, Facebook, Insta, your hashtag as you reflect and comment through the day, Black Mums Matter. If we can do that and elevate the conversation, as Mama Elsie said, this is a worldwide conversation today. We're live streaming, so we want the world to participate. And so we'd like you to hashtag Black Mums Matter. Just before we get going, before we get busy, it's always a thing that we do at the end. We're going to do at the beginning with our acknowledgements, you know, because some of you may leave early, but it's important to thank Mama Elsie and her team for putting this event on today. Let's hail her, please. Thank you. For those who are making particular contributions in the spirit of Sankofa, in the spirit of our African traditions, Thea Gale and Sister Sandra Golding. And for our live stream techie people who do such things under such pressure and do it with such grace and humor. Brother Theo, MediaNet Live. Could you hail him, please? And in advance of the fantastic contributions, all the presenters that you're going to be hearing from today, Dr. Jenny Douglas, Professor Dorothy Roberts, Professor Leslie Page, Lena Duncan, and Sister Jenny Joseph. I would like to also thank them in advance of your contributions today. So we have time to make up, and it's important as we go forward, we must first hear from the voices of women in the reproductive cycle. And I'm going to ask Mama Elsie to come forward as a vicarious representative of those voices. So can we welcome you again, please?
Hard to reach. This is a trigger warning, actually, because some of the issues that I'll be mentioning are quite shocking and cause me a bit of trauma myself. So I have permission to raise and to share these issues with you. Some you will probably not believe, but I assure you they are true. I felt they were very busy and did not explain to me what was happening. They didn't say it, but it showed in their attitude and their body language, as if to say, I had to wait my turn. They made me feel I was bothering them, in a way. I just had to wait till they got to me, and I did not like it. Personally, I don't think he was that helpful, as I was telling him things, and he was twisting it. He was putting it in his own way, which was different to mine. And he was involving social services, and I am not a big fan of social services, as they have let me down before. I did not feel any connection with the midwife to help me. She didn't help me to feel comfortable with her at all. But this midwife is not a people person. She should have been more self-aware. She gave me no respect because of my background, and I would have preferred a midwife with sympathy or to deal with me as a friend. All of these are women of African descent. No food was allowed to be brought in for me, and I would have wanted some African food, but the hospital food was only Asian and English food. It is our culture to breastfeed, but I also got information from my mother. I wanted to go to the antenatal classes, but I was sick a lot of the time. Also, all the classes were in English, and no Arabic classes available. The person who helped me most was my health visitor. And then some personal experiences I've had with women who have free birthed or tried to free birth or intend to free birth. Primarily, they talk about wanting a spiritual aspect to their birth, which they do not get in the systemic way that maternity services is delivered, and really that's what they would like. They want to see the same midwife most of the time, and certainly if they have a problem, the same doctor most of the time, and that isn't always available to them. One woman who I worked with said, they knew I was frightened, but they pinned me down. That actually traumatized two of us who were present with that woman. Another woman who decided to free birth and actually did free birth ended up with 7 policemen threatening to break down her door. This is the UK, where free birth is lawful. Women can do it, and they do it. But she felt because she was a black woman free birthing, they sent the police to her door. No cause for concern, but the 7 policemen were there to break down her door. And these are the sorts of stories that you hear from women when they trust you. So they come to us for help, they come for advice, signposting, and these are the stories that we get from time to time. I'm not on my own here. I'm part of a collective, Mimosa Midwives, who, actually, maybe you should just stand up now. Yvonne, do you want to just stand up? So Yvonne leads our collective. She's our most senior midwife in the practice, Julia Brown. . Michelle? Oh, there you are, Michelle. We have a PMA who used to be, where is she? Andrea, are you here? Well, we have we have a supervisor of midwives. Well, she was a supervisor of midwives. She's now our PMA. And then finally, Andrea, do you want to? We're just identifying you as the supervisor of midwives who was most helpful to us when we were working with women. So thanks. And then finally, do you want to sit down for a bit? And then we are very, very fortunate to have Professor Leslie Page as our patron. Leslie? Thanks. So we are a collective, and we are actually supporting women in many different spheres: breastfeeding, advice, guidance, aquanatal, baby nurturing, breastfeeding, and so on. So the voices of women we have to be working with because we are hard to reach, they say. We're not actually hard to reach. People just have to trust us. So if I can hand it back to you.
Thank you, Mama Elsie. So now we come to our first critical contribution from Dr. Jenny Douglas, who is passionate about the health and well-being of black women, as evidenced through her research and public engagement. She has a PhD in women's studies from the University of York. Her research is both varied and wide-ranging, spanning 30 years on issues of race, health, gender, and ethnicity. Her chapter, Black Women's Health Matter, Putting Black Women on the Research Agenda, was published in 1992. You can read further about her in your information packs. She is a senior lecturer in health promotion in the Faculty of Wellbeing, Education and Language Studies at the Open University. And so, a warm welcome, please, to Dr. Jenny Douglas. Thank you.
Oh, are you going to do my slides for me? If you want. Oh, yes, please, yeah. Okay, hello everybody, and I'm so pleased to be here, and I'm so pleased to see this event happening, because, oh, okay, is that better? Is that better? Okay, because the issue of deaths among black mothers is urgent. As Jendai said, I've been working in the field of black women's health for 30 years. And I'm going to sort of quote in my presentation something that I wrote 27 years ago. And I'm thinking, what? Still? Still? How long do we have to wait? So in my presentation, I'm going to do a little bit of looking back so that we can move forward. Okay, I'm going to try and struggle now with it. Okay, might be easier for me to stand here, actually. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so in my presentation, I'm going to say a little bit about the post-war migration of black women in the UK, the Windrush generation, and a little bit about what black women have experienced working in the NHS, how black families have been seen, how our families have been seen as pathological, how we have been seen as black women as fecund, feckless, and fierce. Why? Oh, am I all mic'd up now? So do I need this? Oh, good. I can move about a bit. The campaigns that we have been involved in as black women to try and make sure that we aren't offered abortions when we don't ask for them, that we're not offered hysterectomies when we don't need them, that we're not, the big campaign I'm going to talk about is the campaign against Depo-Provera, so that we're not offered injectable contraceptives without our knowledge and without our consent. And then moving to now and what we need to do about black mothers and childbirth. Okay, now many of you will know about the post-war migration of Caribbean women and how black women were encouraged to come and work in the UK. So the first main kind of ship that brought Caribbean people to the UK was in 1948, the Windrush ship that docked at Tilbury Docks. And so we talk now about all those women that came in that period up to the 1970s as the Windrush generation. And it would be nice to have, while we do celebrate the successes and the achievements of those women. My mother was one of those women. She was a midwife and she came here in the 50s. But there have been terrible experiences of the Windrush generation that you are all now aware of, in terms of the young children who came and after working for years as teachers, as health workers, finally found they were not British. They had their British citizenship more or less taken away from them. And the impact that that had on their identity, but more importantly, the impact that that has had on their health and well-being and their livelihood. And sad to say, some of those people from the Windrush generation will never get recompense because they've passed on. And I want to set that background, that backcloth, for us to consider what is happening today. Because what is happening today to black women is happening against this hostile environment that we find ourselves in. So as well as the Windrush generation and the establishment of the NHS in 1948, there was also quite large-scale migration from different countries in Africa up until today of women who have been committed to working within the NHS. Next slide, shall I? And you can see the Windrush generation, like I am today, excited about coming to the mother country. And we need to think about how that actually played out for a lot of those women. So black families in the kind of sociological and social policy literature have been seen as pathological, have been seen as dysfunctional. They've been termed as single-parent families, families where there are teenage mothers and absent fathers. But those notions have been challenged by black women sociologists and educationalists. One of the very important collections was written by Beverly Bryan, Stella Dadsey and Suzanne Scaife, and that was The Heart of the Race. And that was a really important turning point because that was black women talking and writing about their experiences here in the UK. And there was quite a lot of focus within that book on the experiences in relation to health and welfare. So if you've not read it, I would go out and read it. It's been republished. The 20th anniversary edition has been republished. Oh, sorry, can I just go back? There have also been other women, black women, who have researched and written about the experiences of black women. Jo Larby, in 1985, working with Training in Health and Race, wrote about the experiences of black women and maternity services. Now, that was 1985. And here we are in 2019, and the same themes are coming up again and again. Anne Phoenix wrote about young mothers, and the question mark is, why is there such a panic, a moral panic, about the whole issue about young mothers? And in her research, she found that there actually wasn't an issue around young mothers. And Melba Wilson brought together a collection around health, Healthy and Wise, which is really another groundbreaking book. And then Tracy Reynolds, writing about Caribbean mothers, challenged some of these notions about reckless Caribbean women. So all the time we're having to work against and challenge the kind of assumptions that are held about us. And I want you to hold that thought, because it's those assumptions that are affecting the kind of maternity care that black women experience. Oh, I've got 7 minutes. Oh, I'm going to have to really hurry up. Okay, I'm not going to read all of this out, but I think it's again another paper that is useful for you to read by Cecily Jones on black women and reproductive politics, which says that again we need to consider what happens today against the backcloth of the racialized mythologies of errant black female sexuality and how race informs the experiences that we have. In the women's health movement in the 1970s, the kind of concerns and desires of black women were largely ignored. So while white women were fighting for the right to have abortion, black women were being given abortions and hysterectomies against their will, without sufficient knowledge and information, because of the assumption that black women were having too many children. And it was a campaign that black women had to fight. And in the words of Sister Song, black women, we wanted the right to have children, not have children, and to parent the children we have in safe and healthy environments. The use of Depo-Provera has been well documented. This was an injectable contraceptive that was given to black, Asian and working class white women without their knowledge or consent. It was manufactured by Upjohn and it was trialled in Jamaica in 1963. But in the 1970s, it was actually being administered in hospitals across the UK. And it was happening a lot in London, but I certainly know it was happening in Birmingham. And it was interesting because in the 80s, early 80s, I went into a black women's group in Birmingham, associated with Hands with Young Mothers. Some of you may know the group that existed then. And I was doing a session on women's health, and I was talking about the side effects of Depo-Provera. And women were putting their hands up and saying, I think I've been given Depo-Provera. And they had been given it without their knowledge and without their consent and without being informed of all the side effects. So Upjohn wanted to have a license for long-term use. And black and white women organised in the 1980s, Brixton Black Women's Group, Spare Rib, Brent Community Health Council, and a lot of women organised to stop Upjohn from getting their licence. And in 1982, their licence was declined by the then Minister of Health. Mm-hmm. So that is the backcloth. Oh, yeah, next one. So that is the backcloth to what we have today, which is that here in the UK, where we have a national health service which is supposed to be free to all at the point of use, black women are 5 times more likely to die in childbirth and from complications in pregnancy. And I ask myself why? How can that be in 2019 in this country with an NHS? And when the report came out in 2018, there was not that much interest in it. I was, what? This is urgent. This is unacceptable. And slowly we're starting to get a conversation about it. A piece of research that was published by Maternity Action, Mothers' Voices, in July 2018, go on to the next one, was looking at the difficulties that were experienced during and after pregnancy by black, Asian and minority ethnic women. And they also investigated women on low incomes because they were experiencing harsher maternal and child health outcomes. And what that report found, and these are just a few of the points from the report, so the report is worth reading, that negative experience of healthcare were associated with prejudice and discrimination and not having legitimate concerns taken seriously. and Elsie has spoken about some of the experiences of women. The experiences of prejudice and discrimination were often associated with language and communication barriers and insufficient cultural competence on the part of health professionals. And the third thing is really of concern, that barriers to care included being refused GP registration because of migration status or ethnicity, and not being able to access interpretive services. And the issue about black mothers, because of their migration status, not having access to healthcare is an important issue that we are facing today. And I'm coming on to the end. As I was preparing my presentation, and I was finishing off on Saturday, and I was watching Twitter as well, somebody that I knew actually tweeted this, and I messaged her and said, can I use your tweet? Because I don't know what the conventions are about Twitter. And Dr. Denise Noble came back and said, yes, please. And she says, then there are the racist cultural stereotypes of black women as unnatural, fecund breeders, able to endure more pain, less morally deserving of care and empathy, and finally, pathological women and mothers. Okay. So, just to conclude, a group of us across the country, actually, we held a conference in 2011 on the health of black women. And from that conference, we formed the Black Women's Health and Wellbeing Research Network. And these are black women who've been working around the health of black women, often isolated, disparate, but we came together because we were all horrified by the treatment that black women were receiving. And we were feeling that we, as black women, need to do something about it. So what we aim to do is to bring together black women, practitioners, activists, policymakers, politicians, researchers, anybody who's interested in the health and well-being and wanting to improve the health and well-being of all black women. And I must acknowledge Banley Burke, who took that photograph that I've always loved for the last 30 years. So I was very pleased that he allowed us to use that photograph as our logo. So, to conclude, the health of black mothers in the UK is inextricably linked to our socioeconomic position, our work experience, our home life, our migration experiences, and the experiences of everyday racism. Next slide. There's just a bit more conclusion. And we need more research on both the physical, psychological, medical, and emotional well-being of black mothers. And it needs to pay attention to race, gender and class and the complexities of life. So it needs to take an intersectional approach. And this research needs to involve black women in order to unpick the maternal harm that black mothers continue to experience. And I'm very quickly, I think I'll just précis, the next slide please. I wrote this in my chapter in 1992, which is 27 years ago. So just to pick out some points, further research is needed. Black women must be involved in setting the research agenda, but many academic organisations are structured in such a way that black women are excluded from the research process. Academic institutions presently involved in women's health research need to give consideration to how structures will be developed to allow positive development of work in this field. And when I went back and read that chapter, and I thought, gosh, I wrote it 27 years ago. I didn't know I'd be standing up here today saying this is what we need to do, and 27 years have passed. Okay, so finally, on to my last slide. Mullings and Schultz argue that health disparities based on race, racism, class and gender sexism are matters of life and death, and no more so than the matters of life and death relating to black women. And that's what we're here to discuss today.
Thank you, thank you. That was Sister Dr. Jenny
you want me to sit down or?
Yes, please.
Okay.
And I'd also like you, while I'm introducing our next critical contribution, to hand over your mic to my sister here,
Okay.
who's going to be speaking next, the one that's in your pocket.
Oh, right, okay. Oh, it's good to have dresses with pockets.
Yes. I was kind of thinking that these things aren't made for us if we got a dress on. You know, there's, the mic's okay, but the bottom bit,
Shall I just
it's got a belt clip on it. You got a pocket? Excellent, thank you. So we come to our next critical contribution that should take us up to lunch. We're going to hear from Dr. Dorothy Roberts and hopefully have some time for a little bit of Q&A, because I don't know about you, but there was a few jaw-dropping moments in our previous presentation from Sister Jenny. Don't you think so? It's absolutely alarming. And so yes, so I'm going to introduce Dr. Dorothy Roberts and also give some time for the setting up of the next set of slides.
You can put it wherever you want. Oh, there. No need to be taking. Okay. And you'll advance the slides? I'll just kind of point to you? Right. I will. Okay. Thank you. Now we just need the slides. I know, it does, but otherwise, I don't know what. You're right, maybe. You're right, I might end up doing that too.
Theo?
Let's see. If I have the presenter view either. I know.
So while they're sorting out the
I think I want to stand
presentation,
to see what
perhaps we just take a few minutes to introduce the two Iolanthe trustees that are in the room.
And she checked and said it was.
Ladies, so we have with us Sheena Byram, who is a practicing midwife and someone who I've long admired. Sheena, I remember coming to see you when you were, I think, consultant midwife, because at that time I was interested in the leadership aspect of our profession. So we've got Sheena Byram with us, who is doing quite a lot of work in terms of the literature for practicing midwives, for aspiring midwives, student midwives, and others who are interested. So thanks, Sheena. And then we've got, do you want to show your face?
I like this, yeah.
And then we've got Mars Lord, a new grandmother. That's her claim to fame. But Mars is a new trustee for the Iolanthe. And she is a doula and a mega activist for women, all women, but certainly women of African descent. She's certainly in full knowledge of what's going on in the field. And the thing about doulas, we often have an argument, doulas and myself, because I am also a trained doula. And I did the doula training simply to recover the softer aspects of my work as a midwife, because when I returned in 2001, I found that the workload was very heavy, the women were not having as much attention as when I left, and there was little time to actually practice the soft skills, to listen to women, listen to the things that they're saying and the things they're not saying, because often it is the things that they're not saying that actually have greatest meaning. And the model of care that doesn't allow you to follow a woman from the beginning of her pregnancy all the way through to the end of 6 weeks. There's very little time to actually develop therapeutic relationships of trust and confidence. So doulas actually take up that role. They're not regulated, but they are an extremely helpful time for the mothers, really. So, yeah.
Yay!
So now I'd like to introduce to everyone another contribution to Reproductive Sankofa today, Black Mums Matter. Dorothy Roberts is a 14th Penn Integrates Knowledge Professor and George A. Weiss University Professor of Law and Sociology at the University of Pennsylvania, with joint appointments in the departments of Africana Studies and Sociology and the Law School, where she is the inaugural Raymond Pace and Sadie Tanner Mussel Alexander Professor of Civil Rights. She's also the founding director of the Penn Program on Race, Science, and Society, an internationally recognized scholar, public intellectual, and social justice advocate. She has written and lectured extensively on the interplay of gender, race, and class in US institutions, and has been a leader of transforming public thinking and policy on reproductive health, child welfare, and bioethics. So as we conclude our context setting and looking at the journey to this point, we have this wonderful contribution. Please welcome Dr. Dorothy Roberts.
Thank you so much. Oh, it's always nice to turn around and see the wonderful audience that I saw streaming in, but you all look fantastic. It's such an honor to be here. I met Jenny Douglas a couple years ago, I think, when she came to my office at University of Pennsylvania, and she had emailed me out of the blue. You see, so it's so good when you answer people's emails. I've made so many wonderful international connections that way. And she emailed me and said, I have this research network in the UK, and I'm very concerned about Black maternal deaths, and I want to do something about it. And I know you've been working on the issue in the US. Can I just come and talk to you and we can share some ideas? And now, 2 years later, we're at this wonderful convening. So I'm really happy for that. Thanks so much, Elsie, for all the work you did to organize this, and it's been wonderful communicating with you as well, and wonderful to meet Jenny Joseph, a heroine as well in this struggle. I am a law professor and a sociologist, not a midwife, but someone tweeted the other day, Marlo David, that I was her intellectual midwife and that Jenny Douglas was her actual midwife. So we have that connection. I said I'm going to claim that title of intellectual midwife. So it's interesting. A lot of what I have to say parallels so precisely what Jenny Douglas said about what's going on in the UK. We have a very similar situation, and we were talking last night about how in the US we say, boy, we would love to have a universal government-based healthcare system like they have in the UK. But I hear then that these same issues of disrespect and devaluation of Black mothers happens in that healthcare system. And actually, I've recently written a piece about the Medicare for All campaign in the US, which is great, universal healthcare for everyone, but written how without being anti-racist, it's going to have the exact same problems, because access alone isn't enough if you have people within the system who disrespect you because of your race or gender, sexuality, or religion, or other types of hierarchies. So I, like Jenny, I've been working in the reproductive justice struggle for more than 30 years. This is a picture of me in the 2004 with some other members of the Black Women's Health Imperative in that march for women's lives. But my very first reproductive justice experience was before the term reproductive justice was ever coined, before I thought of myself as a reproductive justice warrior. And that was in the 1980s when I had my first three babies. I've since had a fourth in my old age, but my first three, my two little boys, and I was pregnant with my daughter there. And I had all three of them at home. I never saw a doctor during any of my prenatal care or the delivery of my baby. I was completely attended by two sisters who were midwives, Puerto Rican independence warriors who started their own clinic in Harlem in the United States, in New York. And I knew them through some political work I was doing at the time. And I felt very strongly that I wanted these women to assist the birth of my babies. I did not want to go anywhere near a hospital. Even though I'd done no research on this whatsoever at the time, I just knew that the healthiest and the most valued and loving place for me to have my babies was at home, attended by midwives who cared about me and cared about my life and my well-being. And so that was my first reproductive justice experience, yeah. I then went on to begin research in the late 1980s on the devaluation of black mothers, the long-standing devaluation of black mothers, and that came out of my concern about the prosecutions of black women for drug use during pregnancy that was going on in the late 1980s, early 1990s. And as I began to argue that this was a form of punishing these women for having babies, I looked into the long history of the devaluation of black women and many of the kinds of policies that Jenny Douglas was talking about, the sterilization, the coerced birth control, and traced it all the way back to slavery when, of course, African women were forced to have children, did not control or even own their wombs, or their children were owned by others as they were enslaved, and the way in which the very notions of reproductive freedom that we have in the United States have been so shaped and distorted by racism. In that book, I tell the story of a woman named Lori Griffin, who in 1989 was 8 months pregnant with her child. And she was served at a hospital, the Medical University Hospital of South Carolina, which had entered into a policy with police and prosecutors to test the women there for drug use. And if they found that they were using drugs, that the police would arrest them. If they were found to be using drugs after the baby was born in the delivery, they were literally taken from the delivery room in handcuffs and leg shackles and locked up in the Charleston County City Jail. And Lori was 8 months pregnant when they discovered that she had been using drugs. They arrested her, locked her up. Well, actually, she was transported they confined her to the hospital, and she was transported. I reversed. She was confined her to jail. She was transported to the hospital for prenatal care, and then back to jail. And then, you could slide, when she was delivering, was chained to the bed. Now, this is not her. This is a photo I got offline, but this represents a practice that continues in the United States, although there's been a movement to stop it, and some states have stopped the practice, although even in states where it's illegal, we found that it's still going on, where incarcerated women, when they are in labor, are chained to the bed. In fact, some women with even less freedom to move about than the woman in this picture. Their legs are chained down, their hands chained down. And anyone here who's had a baby or has delivered a baby knows that that is a form of torture. And women have been physically harmed from this. And it's an example of the way in which the prison system is intersecting with other systems of oppression in the United States that devalue women, and in particular, black women who are disproportionately locked up, and locked up mostly because of traumas that they've experienced. These are all of these women I'm talking about so far are women who need and deserve health care. They need care, and what they are given is punishment. And that's why I argue they are being punished not so much for their conduct, but for having babies. That's what they're being punished for. That practice, and again, I think of Jenny saying, I wrote this 27 years ago. Killing the Black Body just had its 20th anniversary. It was published in 1997. The policies that I wrote about in the book have only intensified. Now, what's also intensified is the movement against them. The reproductive justice movement has developed since that time, and I'll talk about it more in a minute, but the policies of criminalizing pregnancy have intensified. So when I wrote about this in the late 1980s, early 1990s, prosecutors were using laws already on the books to prosecute women, things like distribution of drugs to a minor through the umbilical cord, I'm not making this up, assault with a deadly weapon, child abuse, so they were, and homicide. So they were using, or attempted homicide, using these laws and twisting them to attack pregnant women. Today, legislatures in the US are passing laws intended to punish women or pregnant people for conduct during pregnancy, but anything can be considered risky to a fetus. And so I'd say they're criminalizing pregnancy itself. This is a photo of Regina McKnight, who had a stillbirth. Okay, in what she should have gotten medical care and empathy for the tragedy of her stillbirth. What does she get? Arrested and charged with homicide for killing her baby. And she spent 8 years in prison before the highest court in South Carolina finally threw out her conviction because there was no proof that she caused the stillbirth. They put on a doctor who didn't know what he was talking about, a supposed expert who made up some mumbo-jumbo fake science about it, and the jury convicted her, and it was only after 8 years in prison that lawyers were able to get the conviction overturned for ineffective assistance of counsel is what the claim was, but it was because there was no evidence against her. The evidence doesn't matter in these cases. These are mostly, they're all low-income and poor women, and disproportionately black women who are being prosecuted, and a convergence in the US now of attacking pregnancy of either women who want to terminate a pregnancy, so you know a whole slew, hundreds of laws being passed to make it harder to access abortion services, so much so that it's virtually non-existent in many parts of the United States. But that has converged with punishing women who want to have babies, but there is some pregnancy loss that they are now blamed for and even criminally punished for. Sterilization, abuse, violence has continued in the United States, and prisons are one place, again, where you have the most vulnerable people, and therefore it's the easiest place for the state to come in and impose these harsh policies. It was discovered that in California, at about 150 women that we know of have been sterilized without their consent, some without even their knowledge. And the head of the program made it clear that he thought he was saving the state of California money. He actually said this to a reporter, that he had saved the state of California money by keeping these women from having babies. This is based on a long history in the US. I would say that history is even worse than in the UK, because in the US, enslavement of African people lasted longer, and it was followed by white terror against black people, and a converging, Jim Crow converged with the period of eugenics in the United States, where it was state policy to mandatorily sterilize people who were deemed unfit to have children. That was the official policy in the United States, and most states had mandatory sterilization laws. That in North Carolina, it was discovered recently that their eugenics board continued to operate until the 1970s. Okay, this is a board that decided that certain people had to be sterilized by the government. And by the 1960s and early 70s, it was mostly black women on welfare who were being sterilized. There was a campaign to expose this, and also legislation passed to give reparations to the surviving victims of this policy, but not all have gotten their money yet. But black women testified about how they had been forced to be sterilized simply because they were receiving welfare benefits. So this image of black women, and again, what Jenny Douglas said is very resonates with the image in the United States. This is a very common image of black women in the United States. In fact, it's so common that the term welfare queen is like a household word. Everybody knows that's a black woman who has babies in order to get a welfare check. Now, this woman does not exist in reality, but the myth is so strong that black women are ripping off taxpayers by having babies, and therefore they're a social problem, and social policy should be directed to keeping black women from having children. That was so strong that when Ronald Reagan used it, this image, he deliberately promoted this image, it led to a backlash against welfare, which in the United States until 1996 was a federal right that people have, a federal entitlement. And so in 1996, liberal President Clinton, and this is racism cuts across all political backgrounds, signed a bill to restructure welfare, meaning it was abolished as an entitlement, and it is now a behavior modification program. What it is, it deliberately, Congress wrote in the preamble to the law, it is to get poor women into low-wage menial work, to stop them from having children, and based on the theory that if they have fewer children or no children, and they get married, it also promotes marriage, that's going to end all the problems that black people have. Of course, the flip of that is blaming black mothers for all the problems that black people and America has. And a piece of that legislation was to allow for what's called family caps or maximum child benefit or child exclusion policy, where if you are receiving welfare benefits and you have another child, there is no increase in your welfare check. And it's deliberately to deter women who are already receiving welfare from having more children. So in the US, I say when we talk about the one-child policy in China and say, oh, it's dictatorial, it's autocratic, we have it in the US. In many states in the United States have now passed those laws. This same idea that is used against black mothers who want to have children has been used against black mothers who want to terminate their pregnancies, with a campaign that went up across the United States, putting up posters against abortion services and distorting the fact that black women have higher rates of abortion to say that that black women are engaging in genocide against black communities when they access abortion services. And look at this is one of the posters that went up. The most dangerous place for an African American is in the womb. His same message that is used to punish black mothers, to say we're too fecund and feckless and fierce, right? That same message being used to blame black mothers who seek abortion services. So it just cuts across the board, this idea that black mothers' wombs are dangerous and therefore we should not have control over our own wombs. That's the overall message, that someone else should control our wombs. Now, the horrifying statistic that Jenny Douglas noted is very similar to the US, and there's lots of empirical data to back it up, so no one can question this. First, this is embedded in the fact that in the United States, and here again, we're worse than the UK, the maternal mortality rate is actually going up. I mean, think about this. I was saying this, I was talking to the man who in the taxi who picked me up from Paddington Station yesterday about this conference. And he was like, well, it's Mother Nature that women should die from. So I'm trying to argue with him, and I said, okay, you at least have to agree that even if Mother Nature causes certain women to die, in an advanced industrial nation, the deaths shouldn't be going up. Can you agree with that, at least, right? He said, oh, I guess that's right. I guess that's right. You don't want to know the conversation I had with this man on the way. But anyway, it's going up. And who's bearing the brunt of these increases in deaths? It's black women in the United States, where we are 3 to 4 times more likely to die from pregnancy-related complications than white women. And in some parts of the US, in the Mississippi Delta, the rates of death for black women are higher than the rates in Rwanda and Kenya. Yes. Oh, yes. Yes. It's horrifying. It's horrifying. It is as if black women in the US, in some parts, are living in a developing country where there's no excuse. There's no excuse for it. We are the richest country in the world in the US, and we spend more on health care, but it's not benefiting black women. And so again, it's not just about access to health care or money spent on health care, it's who's controlling health care. Now, what is the research looking into this? I wholly agree with Dr. Douglas that we need to be involved in this research, because much of the research going on in the United States to discover the reasons why black women have more complications, more deaths, more preterm births, assumes that there's something wrong with us innately. And I don't have time to go into the whole meaning of race and racism. Let me just say, race is an invented category that was designed to support racism. And being black is not a risk factor. Racism is a risk factor. Anti-black racism is a risk factor. Being black innately, it's absurd to think that somehow evolution produced this huge group of people that we identify as black and predisposed us to die. Okay, that's absurd. Why would anyone have a credible hypothesis? I don't even understand how this could be funded or published. It's an absurd hypothesis that black race, independent, of other factors, meaning social factors. Now, I mean, they're asserting that if you control for all social factors, black women would still be more likely to have these complications because there's something inside of us that predisposes us naturally to have these bad outcomes. I won't go into the study, but first of all, you can't prove that unless you control for every factor. And they didn't. They couldn't control, for example, for experiencing racism. So, the main factor that probably causes it, they didn't even have in their study. And yet they concluded that genetics is an important part of the public health crisis. Now, another problem is the dominant frame of the mainstream reproductive rights movement in the United States, which is changing as women of color have been listened to more by reproductive rights organizing in the US, but it revolves around the choice framework, the idea that what reproductive rights is all about is giving people more choices. And that if you just have the choice, you've got freedom. But that isn't true if you live in a society where you aren't even considered to be an equal human being, and where even if you have the choice to go to a particular hospital, you're going to be devalued and treated poorly. And that's if you have the ability to go there. The fact that the hospital exists doesn't mean anything if you don't even have the resources or your community isn't set up in a way that would give you access to that hospital. And so choice is a bad way to think about what freedom means. So instead, what black women in leadership, other women of color, have been organizing for is reproductive justice. And Jenny included on one of her slides a quote from Sister Song that states the basic tenets of reproductive justice, which is that it's the right to have a child, to not have a child, and to raise a child in a safe and healthy and nurturing and valuing environment. And that's based on an intersectional approach that understands that our lives are shaped by our social, political, economic context, and that has to be taken into account and changed where there are inequalities. Without social change, we can't have reproductive freedom. It's not just a matter about giving choices, it's a matter of changing the structures that affect our reproductive lives. Now, I believe, as I believed when I had those babies almost 40 years ago now, that my oldest, I think, just turned 38, I think, yeah. 37, that little baby you saw. I think that midwives are essential, and black midwives in particular, essential to not only addressing the devastation, the abomination of the high rates of black maternal death, but also in decolonizing birth more broadly and democratizing healthcare more broadly. Midwives break away from the hierarchies in medicine that are part of the reason why we have these abysmal rates of death. The hierarchies between communities at the bottom and professionals at the top. The hierarchies between doulas and midwives and nurses and then doctors at the top. The hierarchies of race and gender and class and religion and sexual orientation, and ability and disability. All of these hierarchies that are what produces these unequal outcomes. And I think that black midwives challenge that and therefore challenge the very structures of healthcare that are so damaging, so unhealthy. And so, in closing, I want to tell you about a campaign that went on in the US, Trust Black Women. I don't deserve to be shamed for my reproductive health decisions, and trust me to make the best decisions for myself, my family, and my community. That reproductive justice organizers put on with their own billboards to challenge those billboards that said the most dangerous place for an African American child is the womb. And Black midwives are part, I think, of this campaign to trust Black women to care for our communities and our families and ourselves, and to be leaders in changing the way that healthcare is distributed, which clearly is deadly. It's not working. The statistics show, the deaths show, it's not working. We need radical change. And in the reproductive justice movement, we've seen that Black women as leaders have already made tremendous changes, and we should continue to trust Black women and Black midwives to lead the way to the radical changes we need in order to end the deaths of Black women from pregnancy and childbirth, and to put in place a vision of what it would mean. What would it mean to have true birth justice, reproductive justice, and an equitable and just society for everybody? So thanks so much. And
thank you. Wow.
Thank you. I don't know if we should do
what I would like us to do now, if I may call both our intellectual reproductive justice and advocates out to the front.
Okay.
If you can take a seat, and if you hold on to your mic, and we can share this one. We're going to take some questions and some comments from you now for the next 20 minutes. So if you could keep them short. So please, no Omer's Hilliard today or Ben Okri's Famish Road. We just don't have time. We have 20 minutes for some short questions. And so, yes, please stand and introduce yourself, and then please let us know who your question is directed to. Is there another mic? I'll share this one for now.
Thank you both for the amazing presentations. My name is Nahanda Truscott-Reed, and I'm a coach for women during the transition of motherhood. And I'm really interested in the role of Black midwives. You mentioned that was one of the solutions, but you also alluded to the power structures that they are in place of. And so the power that they have or aren't really wielded kind of limits the changes that they can make. So I wonder if it's about stepping outside of the system and actually creating alternatives and encouraging women to kind of seek alternative situations. I just wondered if you could speak to what that might look like and what Black midwives could do outside of the system.
Well, I believe, I don't want to speak for her, but I believe that Jenny Joseph, that's exactly going to be the theme based on a conversation we had last night. As I was saying, initially in the US, we often think that if we get universal single-payer healthcare, government-provided healthcare, in other words, Medicare for all or some system like that, that is going to solve the problems. But as we see in the UK, even with that kind of a system and participating in that system, anti-Black racism continues to produce these unhealthy outcomes for us. And so I think that reproductive, even if we go back to the Black health movement, the Black Women's Health Project, now the Black Women's Health Imperative, and other Sister Song, other reproductive justice organizations that have been in existence for decades and are emerging now, there is a focus on community-based healthcare, community alternatives, whether we're talking about in the Black Women's Health Project, it was self-care groups that would meet in women's homes to discuss the health issues they had and to come up with plans and strategies for addressing it. So there's long been a tradition of, sometimes we've been forced to do it. You know, why do we have a strong tradition of Black midwives? Because there was no healthcare service for Black women in the United States under Jim Crow. It was segregated, or we were excluded from it. And so we have an experience where whether it's forced by official state policy, or it's because of these forms of racism that continue despite the civil rights movement in the US or the abolition of Jim Crow laws, we have to come up with alternatives. And so I'm really happy that this conference is going to be looking at how do we do that? How do we do that? But it's, you know, of course, it's hard to give a short answer about it because it requires work. It requires strategizing, figuring out ways to work through alternatives, but also being supported. I mean, I think, I have to say, I struggle with this a bit because I believe we should have community-based alternatives that we control. I think that's the only way. I also think, though, that we need to be supported by resources. I've worked with so many groups. Another hat that I wear is working with, in the foster care system, I didn't mention this, but mothers who've had their kids taken away from them. That's a big part of what I was talking about. And Black mothers are disproportionately likely to have their children taken from them for things that other mothers do and are supported. You know, but again, Black mothers blamed and punished, and taking their kids is one way. Black mothers have tried to organize to fight this, but if you don't have money, if you don't have access to policymakers, you know, you have to have both, and I think that's the struggle. Yeah.
Do you have a contribution later?
Yeah, I would totally agree, actually, that that we need to have community-based alternatives where Black women can be appropriately and properly supported. But I think it is a difficult area because I think those alternatives need to be properly resourced. Mm-hmm. However, at the same time, we do have a national health service that we are all contributing to, whether we like it or not. Right. Our money, our taxes is going into the NHS. I think there's such a lot wrong with the NHS, and you know, such a lot of what has happened to the NHS affects Black women and Black women practitioners. I didn't have time in my talk to say very much about the way in which Black nurses, Black midwives are discriminated against, about the awful experiences that Black women have, about how they're more likely to be on competency kind of reviews, you know, in terms of their practice. So there is a lot that has to change within the NHS. So whereas I think it's really important to have alternatives, I think we can't let the NHS off the hook. It is our NHS. Mm-hmm. And we built it. We actually physically built it. People like my mother who came, my aunts who came from the Caribbean and who all worked in the NHS. And I was speaking to my mother on the phone, who's 93. And she was a midwife. And I said, the conference is about maternal mortality. And she said, but when I was a midwife, we never had any deaths of mothers. And then another friend phoned me yesterday who was also had been a midwife, and she said, that's really odd, she said, because when I was a midwife, I never experienced a maternal death. And I think what we have seen is the power and the autonomy that black midwives used to have has been eroded. And so black midwives now are just, they are under the cosh. They're having to do what other people tell them to do, who do not have the knowledge and the expertise that they actually have, but yet they have to undertake what they're being told to do. And so I think it's a hugely complex area that and I think that we really need more black women activists, because black women have advocated for changes in services. We've advocated for changes in sickle cell services, in reproductive rights in relation to Depo-Provera, and in relation to, sorry, I keep waving this back, and in relation to mental health. So, you know, I'm sorry, and it shouldn't be us that we have to fight for appropriate services for us. But if we don't do it, nobody else is going to do it.
It's true.
Thank you. So I'm going to take this lady here, and then I'm going to take your question. So if we can, I don't know, have you got time? Facilities to make a note. I'm going to take 2 questions now.
Thank you. I'll be brief. I'm talking later, but I thought it was worth mentioning now. First of all, this morning has been fantastic. I do feel kind of overwhelmed because the world is turning in the wrong direction. And I hope you'll excuse me speaking about the issue of black women and black midwives, but I think we have to recognise that in this country, our chief midwife, the first chief midwife ever, is Jackie Dunkley-Bent, a black midwife who is doing a huge amount in a very big civil service, in moving midwifery forward, in recognising racial inequalities, and in thinking about this overwhelming agenda in front of us. I think that we have to recognise the strength that we have. She is the most skilled civil servant I've ever seen, and making real changes. And Jana Richens is sitting here, who works with Jackie.
So yeah, I did put my hand up, sorry, and I don't mean to jump in front of anybody else, but Jackie is committed to this agenda, and, you know, also supporting all midwives, because unless all midwives, black, white, yellow, brown, are supported to support women, we're not going to make any difference. So it's about women, and it's thinking about how do we stop the stereotyping and provide culturally competent care. As you quite rightly said, it's not about race, it's about racism. So it's about culturally competent care for all women, whatever country they're in. And I know that Jack is committed to universal proportionalism, such as Marmot has said in the UK, that actually some women need more. And it might be the same for midwives. In some instances, actually, it's not about, you know, addressing that inequality in that way. It's giving those that need it, giving them more.
Can you
so
just
thank
repeat
you.
your question, please?
It was a comment after that, really.
Thank you. So this sister here, thank you.
Hello, thank you both for your talk. I just wanted to ask, what do you think drives this mistreatment? What is it? You know, why are we in this situation? And I know it's a big question, but I think that's important. The foundation of why do we mistreat people, especially black women, but women across the board, in this way? Why is this happening?
Thank you.
And it's to both of you.
Okay, first of all, before I answer your question, I just want to make a point that today we're talking about black mothers and childbirth, but I believe that by improving services for black mothers, we will improve services for everybody. Because mothers are at kind of they're at the kind of the top of the iceberg. No, I'll be good. I won't wave it around. They're at the top of this kind of iceberg. Mm-hmm. But once we get it right for black women, we will improve it for all. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And then you ask, well, what's at the base of the mistreatment? And I think we have to acknowledge that a lot of it is about anti-black racism. And I think sometimes in the past we've skirted around the issues and we've not been prepared to hit it head on. And that is why, some of the initiatives that we've tried to use to improve black maternal care have not worked, because we've not acknowledged that black women actually experience racism. And I think until we acknowledge that, and we try to address that, and I think that we have to address it at several levels, both in terms of training, in terms of policy making, but actually what we need to do is to address it in much wider society. I didn't mention issues in terms of austerity, but it's black women who've had the real losses in terms of the recent austerity measures that we've seen over the last 10 years. Mm-hmm. And those austerity measures, I hadn't realised until very recently, that in terms of getting benefits, that if you have more than a certain number of children, you no longer, 2 children,
same
you no
thing.
longer get
Same
benefits.
thing. It's the same.
I mean, that is just awful. I mean, it's just, we have to do so much to make changes within our society. Mm-hmm. But I don't think that we can shy away from it. We have to hit it head on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's right. I'll just add a little bit that I think ties together a couple points that Jenny just made about how if we get it right for black mothers, we radically change the entire system and it's better for everyone. And your final point about austerity, because in the US, and I see it's the same in the UK, I think this is a global phenomenon that has started in the 80s with roots even prior to that, of privatization, cutting back, and that is always has to be complemented, coupled with an increase in punishment. Because when you have austerity, neoliberalism, privatization, you have the most marginalized people who are suffering from that cutback. And the government has to do something to contain those people, which is why we see this rise in criminalizing pregnancy, in incarceration. The United States incarcerates more people than any place in the world. I see that these trends, they're a little bit different in the UK and the US, but they're very parallel. We see the overall trend is the same. Cutbacks, austerity, privatization, and then increase in punishing the people who are suffering the most, and black women are those people. Now there's also an ideological way this works, which is if you can blame black mothers for all the problems that come out of these government policies, it is a distraction from social change. So in other words, if wealthier women and white women, more privileged women, believe that black mothers deserve all of this that the government's doing to them, all the deprivation because they're bad mothers, it is a barrier to coming together to fight these policies which are bad for everybody. So once we begin to see the way this works and come together to fight the policies of the carceral way that governments are addressing the needs, human needs of people, then we can make a change, and that change is going to be most drastic most wonderful, for the most marginalized women, but it's going to create a society that is healthier for everybody. And that's one of the reasons why it's important to address this topic is critical, because it's a topic that shows how horrible this system is, how inhumane it is, but also why it is that people are able to ignore it, to pretend that it's not about racism, to pretend that it's not about an attack on people who are poor, to pretend that it's their fault. And once we can address it honestly, we can actually come together to make radical change.
Yep, indeed. So I'm going to take a risk and take a very, if you can, please, one more question from this side, an extremely short question with an extremely short answer. Thank you very much, if that's okay. The sister in the yellow.
Hi, my name's Tashawn Linsky-Wilkie. I'm a midwife and I work for the local maternity system in Cheshire and Merseyside. And it's really just to champion what we're doing up there. And you've spoken about the NHS and how it is part of our responsibility to do things. So at the moment in Liverpool, we've got a team of midwives called the Nest Midwives that focus on supporting women that are non-English speaking. And that is out in the community, and we're able to provide services in local libraries, other areas in a non-clinical setting as well. So I just wanted to share that with you, that obviously reducing this inequality is on the map for us. And I work with 27 partnerships. Is quite a big area to cover, but we are working towards supporting that in the NHS as well. It's not something that we're forgetting about, just to kind of give everybody some motivation that we are listening as well. I didn't really have a question, but I suppose now that I'm yeah, that we are doing things, and I'm particularly in my role spearheading that, and we will be running a study day in December, looking at how we can support migrant and refugee women and BME communities, so I'll share that information with you as well.
So we'll take a couple of quick responses before we go into our lunchtime.
Okay, I just have a quick question for you. Is your project permanently funded? Okay, I wanted to ask that question, and I'll make it a very quick reply, because over the years that I've been involved in this area, what I've seen is short-term projects that last for 3 years, then the funding runs out, and then somebody says, oh, do you know what we should do? We should have a project, and then they reinvent the wheel, and they have another project which they fund for 3 years. And whereas I think it's really important what you're doing. I am really kind of concerned that the NHS continues to do this, have short-term projects. People put their all into those projects. That, it's the goodwill of people working in the project that the project actually succeeds. And then at the end of the 3 years, the contracts end and they forget all about it until 10 years later they think, oh, we'll do it again.
Can I just say that there is a commitment to funding at the moment? It hasn't been announced yet.
Okay.
They're looking at constitutive care for 75% of the early women, and there is money to actually support that.
Thank you. If we can speak through the chair, that would be helpful. Thank you. Yes. Okay, so we're eating into your eat time. We are going to start back at 1:45, so if you can, 1:45. So if you can be in the room before then, thank you very much. Enjoy your lunch. I'm not sure where it is. Follow something that smells nice. Thank you very much.
I know. Packed room, so that's good. Yeah.
Because I think that this discussion really needs to take place.
Yes. And now you have to sustain it. Back 20 years and say, oh, nothing happened.